Good afternoon. The April the 19th meeting of the Oklahoma City Water Utilities Trust is in order. I would be remiss not to mention the fact today is the anniversary of the bombing in Oklahoma City, and all of us, I think, that's on our minds during the day, and it's just something we won't ever forget it here, but it doesn't hurt to call our attention to it before we start, I believe. The first item on the meeting agenda is the approval of the minutes from the April 5th meeting.
Second.
A motion and a second to approve the minutes. Are there comments or questions concerning the minutes? Hearing none, voting please. Minutes are approved. The next item is the consent docket.
Move the docket subject to individual consideration.
Have a second? I have a motion and a second to approve the consent docket. Are there items to be considered individually? No items. Hearing none, voting please. Consent docket's approved. Next item is the concurrence docket.
Second.
There are two items on the concurrent docket. Are there any matters there to be discussed individually? Hearing none, voting please. The concurrence docket's approved. Next item is an emergency item. First, there are two items. The first one is approval of a resolution declaring an emergency and ratifying approval of bidding documents for emergency 30-inch aerial crossing replacement south of Northeast 120th and east of Eastern.
Move approval.
Motion and a second to approve item 5A.
Can I ask a question? What kind of material will you use in that aerial crossing?
Aerial crossings are, historically, aerial crossings were iron. So what we're seeing is, even though we inspect them regularly, periodically we'll come upon one that has lost its top or has holes in the top.
This is the one we're replacing, is a ductile iron, yes?
Yes, and typically we're going in with a stronger plastic pipe.
So,
It's a different technology now. We can put plastic pipe on an aerial crossing adequately.
are we anticipating a life extension due to the use of plastic versus ductile iron?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions on item 5A? Hearing none, voting please. 5A is approved. Next item is 5B, the resolution declaring an emergency and ratifying approval of bid documents for a project at between Southwest 29th and Southwest 27th and Brock Drive to Virginia.
Move approval.
Second. Motion and a second to approve item 5B. Are there questions concerning 5B? Hearing none, voting please. 5B is approved. Next item is a permanent easement, item 6.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to accept the easement. Are there questions, concerns? Hearing none, voting please. Item 6 is approved. Next item, item 7, series of 4 reports.
Move we receive the reports.
Have a motion and a second to receive the reports. Are there reports to be discussed separately?
Question on report 7A.
Report dealing with lake levels. It shows Hefner 6.16 below maximum elevation. This was in March of 2011. Has that continued to deteriorate, and if so, at what rate, and what is your estimate of what the current level might be?
Yes, we're at about 1192 today, which means that we're impacting boats in storage that are in the shallow end of the storage. Some are still operating, but boats with big keels and in the shallower stalls are out of water completely. We are preparing, while on that topic, while we are expecting a rainy May, we certainly have not caught any rain yet this spring. But again, forecast is for a typical rainy May, which we believe will be helpful and has the potential to solve the problem. However, in the past, we have in drought conditions taken a spring release from Lake Canton. We don't know that we will need one, but staff is communicating with Oklahoma Water Resources Board to schedule an appointment to discuss such a release and doing that in advance so that when a release is possible, which is around the end of May, we would then take a release from Lake Canton. So we're going belts and suspenders. If we don't get spring rain, but we'll have things set up so that we might take a release as early as possible. The schedule for Lake Canton is one that's delayed by spawning of fish. Schedule for release is delayed by spawning of walleye fish in Lake Canton. So that's what would hold us up from doing one now.
About how much water would we be asking for out of Canton?
I'm sorry, I don't know yet. The staff has made a recommendation, and I have not reviewed it with them yet.
All right, thank you.
Other questions on any other reports?
And we returned with some information about the Draper Fueling Facility. Based on the details, that's a courtesy dock facility question from staff about whether fueling at Lake Draper, whether conditions have changed there so that we might eliminate fueling at the dock. I can tell you that as we developed the project, fueling was understood to be a part of the project as we were designing it.
And that was at the $143,000 estimated cost?
Yes, sir.
Is there any way for the city to recover that through the fuel sales?
Not at present, no.
Do you intend to go forward with it then?
Trustees, it would be a part of the project unless you direct us not to include it.
Actually, there is not fuel available within a mile of the marina.
That's correct.
We say it's roughly a mile, but I just went to see.
That's Lake Hefner. It's 4 miles.
4 miles there.
Okay, that says Hefner's is a mile away. I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, it is considerably further to Draper at about 4 miles.
Yeah. Well, I suspect that the concessionaire who will make a profit, obviously, off the fuel is somewhat dependent on that. That is keeping a concessionaire there has been a problem for several years now, and I suspect he relies to some extent on starting to recover some money as a result of the profit they'd make on the gasoline. So for now, unless we take some action, otherwise the fueling station will be left there. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, unless you otherwise advise.
All right. Okay. Further questions or comments on the reports? We have a motion and a second to receive them here. If there are no further comments, voting please. Reports are received. Now, the item for individual consideration. The first one is approve a permit with the Boathouse Authority to provide access to Stinchcomb.
Move approval.
A motion and a second on item 8A. Are there questions or comments?
Will the permit be limited strictly to kayak operations? There'll be no motorboats or anything else like that permitted?
Mike Knopf's here. Perhaps we could have him come and discuss the plans.
Okay.
Hello, I'm
State
Mike
your name.
Knopp with the Oklahoma City Boathouse Foundation.
State your name and address for the record, please.
Yeah, it's Mike Knopp, 10620 Pinewood Forest Circle, Oklahoma City. The Oklahoma City Boathouse Foundation has developed an operation at Lake Overholser through the Route 66 boathouse. We've renovated the old bait house and the adjacent Stroud House, which is across the river. So we have a pretty significant operation going on out there right now for the community. The Stinchcomb Wildlife Preserve is a popular place to kayak. It's a little far to get into if you're kind of a novice kayaker from the boathouse itself. And a popular thing to do in other places with the kind of resource that we have with the Stinchcombe is to actually do kayak tours where people could be dropped off in an upper part of the river and then paddle down to their destination, which would be the boathouse. And we feel like there is could be a real interest and a great opportunity to expose people to the Stinchcombe Preserve in a very low-impact way, in that it's much in the same way that you would explore a national park or another wildlife preserve on a trail. This would be via the river. We just wanted to have an easy way to get people up there. To do that would just involve us taking people up on one of the access roads and then dropping them off at a designated location and having a guide or somebody paddle back to the boathouse area.
Any questions?
I have a question of staff. We're asking if 5% of their bills, receipts, be paid back, and that will cover what?
Expenses for administration, but the funds are placed in the recreational, non-ratepayer revenue for recreational investments.
So we're charging the kayak people, and yet we're providing $143,000 fueling station for the motorboat. It just seems like it's slightly inconsistent, but that's okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Hearing no further questions, we have a motion.
Yes, we have.
Have a motion and a second to approve item 8A. Voting, please. It's approved. Next item is the approval of fiscal year 2012 loan agreement between the Water Trust and the McGee Creek Authority.
Move approval.
Motion and a second to approve the loan agreement. Is there discussion or questions? Voting, please. Item 7B is approved. Item 7C is recommended the city adopt an ordinance concerning the general schedule of fees pertaining to parks, specifically with regard to stopping, standing, and parking on Lake Hefner Drive.
Move we adopt the ordinance.
Motion and a second to adopt the ordinance. Questions or comments? Voting, please. Ordinance is approved.
This ordinance will be ultimately taken to city council for approval. This is a recommendation to the city council.
That's right.
Yes, sir.
That's right.
Yes, sir.
Next item 7D, is adopt a resolution approving change order number 3 concerning the expansion of a lab information management system.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to approve item 7D. Comments or questions? Voting, please. 7D is approved. Item 7E is approve a professional services agreement for financial advisor services.
I'll move we approve the agreement.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve.
Chairman,
Yes.
How much are we paying this?
How much are we paying for that service now?
This is a de minimis change in the total cost. They've made some hourly pay adjustments. Go ahead, Brett.
The financial advisor services have been dependent upon whether we have bond issues or not. We could bring you a report that shows the amounts we've paid out yearly.
Well, we're estimating it's $110,000 a year now. In round numbers, how does that compare to what we paid in previous years?
The previous similar services were $100,000 a year as a budget item. The exact number, we've had a lot of different projects that we've worked on with the trust lately that have made the numbers a little bit different, but the typical ongoing quarterly updates for the financial plan and such are running at that rate.
Thank you.
No further questions? Voting, please. Item 7E is approved. Item 7F, approve a resolution by the authorizing general manager to approve additional work on the call center efficiency and reporting to improve it. Same.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve item 7F. Are there comments, questions?
Mr. Chairman, just briefly, this item, Aqua we asked Aqua, and they provided for some efficiency reporting review of our call center. We've seen a deterioration in the total productivity of our call center in terms of number of calls handled and timeliness of interaction. We have several proposed changes that we will directly address and bring our call center back, combined with in-house efforts to maintain staffing, train staffing at a higher level than we have recently. This includes working with interactive voice response to make certain that that system is built in the best way possible for customers so that they spend the least amount of time on the phone, how we handle call queues, and particularly how we plan our workforce throughout the day and schedule them based on calls. We have not been fully understanding the tools that we've got and using them 100%, but we've also had some significant vacancies occur in the call center, not gotten people trained fast enough. So we have a management plan. I believe these changes will be a great help to us and have been concerned about a decline in the performance of the call center this year, unlike anything we've seen in the past. So, trying to bring it back to its previous glory.
You said you declined the performance of the call center. How did you measure that?
Looking at detailed telephone records, numbers of calls collected at the first time the customer calls, the time that people are waiting on the phone just to be answered has more than doubled, for example, across the board. Some of that was related to, again, staffing vacancies that occurred rapidly. At the same time, you put the replacements through a 6-week training program, so we're adjusting how we manage that. The call centers, I'm sorry, I'm going off point a little bit, but the call center is very vulnerable to hiring away from the many call centers we have in Oklahoma City. We frankly had not seen that since 2008, and call center hiring seems to be back, at least with our employees, who are, of course, now SAP trained. So it's a combination of many things, but again, particularly, people were waiting on the phone too long. They weren't getting the question answered. Some of the things like having the customer's information pop up on the screen like it does at many call centers when the customer rep picks up the phone will help improve time efficiency, but also encourage the customer to believe we're fully aware of them and ready to help them.
Do you have supervisors monitoring the calls?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Further questions? Have a motion and a second to approve item 8F. Hearing no further questions, voting please. 8F is approved. Item 8G is approval of an agreement with Oklahoma Water Resources Board concerning the progress of the vegetation program at Lake Atoka. I see people from Water Resources are here, and despite the fact you made a presentation at the Lake Atoka meeting, I'd like for you to just kind of maybe give us a brief version of the presentation you made then, if you would, please.
Mr. Chairman, this is Paul Koenig and Sarah Ivey from the Oklahoma Water Resources Board Water Quality Division.
Just identify yourself for the record, please.
Pardon?
Just identify yourself for the record, your name and address.
Paul Koenig, 10950 North Evergreen Drive, Edmond, Oklahoma, 73025. Appreciate this opportunity. This is the sort of picture that we would like people to see when they think about Lake Atoka and what's going on there. See if that'll go. There we go. Why are we involved? It's pretty simple. Our interest is this lake is listed as impaired. Water quality is impaired for fish and wildlife propagation due to excessive turbidity. That also establishes the federal interest. So we were able to get a wetland grant to put plants in the lake that also is going to help in other areas. The other thing is we had a lot of success working with y'all on Lake Stanley Draper. And so this is pretty much just kind of continuing on that. And finally, the last thing is this is what I call a smart lake management practice. Here's one low-tech, low-cost item that addresses several issues: water quality, wildlife, fisheries, maybe even aesthetics if you like plants. And so this is the sort of thing that we like to promote and do across the state, and that, frankly, we're active in a lot of places with. Over half of the project was funded by US EPA, Region 6. There's about $90,000 of local or state cost share. Y'all were kind enough to put in about $41,000 of cash. We made up the difference with cash and also in-kind services. And y'all also were helpful to get a inmate crew that first year. That was very helpful. The last three folks listed there were pretty much consultants, helped us on our decision-making. Biological survey came out at the beginning of the project. The objectives, it's kind of wordy. Basically, the long-term objective is a healthier lake by getting this habitat installed, and really a more diverse ecosystem. We do it with founder colonies. I'm going to skip that part. Founder colony concept. A lot of times when you're planting a garden, you go out and you buy a flat of plants, you put them out there, and you're done. That sort of thing doesn't work well in our open water systems. What we try to do is invest a lot in one small area of the lake, not plant the whole lake, but one small area, high-quality plants, give them good protection. That way, they can put out the seeds. A lot of these fragments of the plants will float off, and they can establish when the time's right. We can't predict the weather, the hydrology, any of that stuff. So we get healthy founder colonies established. Takes a couple of years. Maintain those for a few more years, and hope and let nature do its course. When it works, it's great. So that's kind of the steps on that. And that's those 4 steps is what we did. And we also were able to follow water levels. We were able to get 5 founder colonies in 5 very different areas of the lake, just above the bridge on the right side, over on the east side, that main arm, and then down on the south part of the lake on the east and the west side. Also, we went a little upland and got some trees put in. There's a little bit to the site selection. There were some aquatic plants growing there. We had 3 main species that we saw. Water willow was kind of the big one. It was very helpful in some of the success we saw. What I want to emphasize on the scheme, item 1, focus on emergent plants as poor water quality predicts little success with floating leaf and submerged leaf plant species. It's impaired for turbidity. So we were focusing on getting plants to grow out of the water and and get the air and the sunlight from the air, not ones that grow up and float on the top or have sunlight has to penetrate the water column for them to grow. Those are the ones that, for example, fisheries folks like. They like the submerged plants because the young of the year can hide in there and survive that first year. We really didn't plan on having a success or really doing much of those plants. We put some in just for the heck of it. Plant construction, it's honest work. That's what I can say about that slide. Once you get plants that are growing in the cages protected, we'll pin those up for them to spread even more. You get more seeds and more fragments. Typical layout, the point of this slide was to show the 2 pens on the lower central part of it. There's a large rectangle, and that's the deeper pen and the shallower pen. The way things panned out this project is the first set of pens we put out, we thought were targeted for a dropping pool, which is, you can see, here's the pool elevation over the 3 years that we had the project for dropping pool. And then the next year, that lake was full up the entire growing season. And so those first ones became our deep cages, and then we chased pool levels up shallower, and those were the shallower ones. And then things got maybe closer to normal the last growing season. It's still pretty high. what you can see on the left-hand side is where the water goes over the cage. It's a great place for rough fish and turtles to swim over, have a good salad, and then head back out in the open water if they want. We ended up putting another 1.5 or 2 foot of cage material over that so that they wouldn't get over top so much. The herbivory is the big impediment to getting these plants to grow. There's the guys putting in the shallow cage. And there's that plant you're seeing growing all over is water willow. We started off as that as a target species. We planted, I don't know, 25 plants, 30 plants or so, and then we stopped after the first year because it was going all over the place. Also put in tree seedlings, 3,200 of them. There's one of the Oklahoma City workers along with one of our fellas there with a dibble. And that was a burn area. It was a really nice site. And the conditions were great. It was wet. It was moist. And put them in. I was really surprised. Actually, that happened at Draper and that happened at Atoka. Couldn't imagine 2 projects went that way, but it did. So we put in about 9 different species of trees over a 2-year, 3-year period. They did pretty good, about 60% survival. We worked with the forestry folks to pick species that were good for wildlife. Because we're kind of science people, we have tables and we collect data and we have numbers. But what we saw was the bur oak, the dogwood, the green ash did particularly well. The persimmon, the mulberry, the redbud, and the sycamore didn't. Not sure what that means, but that's kind of what we saw. The main emphasis of the project was the aquatic plantings. We ended up putting over 1,300 plants over 3 growing seasons. We did about 22 different species. The point of this slide is in 2008 we put about 430 plants out, 19 different species. The emergent plants, the ones that come out of the water, did so well, we started shifting over towards more floating leaf plants, and we cut down the species that didn't work at all the previous year. And then the last year we got almost 600 plants put in, and really emphasized the submerged and the floating leaf plants. And some of them did really well in various sites. There's an example of floating leaf plant, Nymphaea odorata, a fragrant water lily. The ones in the cages, they did pretty good, and they all grew well. What we're really looking for in founder colonies is growth outside of the protective areas. We said 27% growth outside of the cage, and 17% coverage is a little short of our goals, but we were really pleased to see this. The thing I would point out on this is, you see, you got mud and a little bit of water. That's where the aquatic herbivores don't like to go. They feel exposed. And so they don't, turtles don't like to crawl up there. The rough fish can't get up there. And so this is a great time for those plants really to flourish and to spread. The point on this slide are the highlighted species. There's about 13 species there. These are the ones that did real good, and these are the ones that should be continued in the future for Lake Atoka. And it's all mostly based on survival. On the pens, we kind of talked about cages. On the pens, we saw a much higher survival. That's because we focused on the plants that we knew did well, where the cages we were trying to figure out what did well the first year. And good percent cover growth. And like at Site 1, the deep pen did as well as the shallow pen. That was really nice to see. Basically relieve the pressure from the herbivores, and these plants did really, really well. Thalia was a good plant. An odd note that we found out last week, we found a paper that we found out that the roots of these has a allelopathic effect on blue-green algae. Who would have thunk? Something we're going to try out on Nuchu Lake in the floating wetlands. Arrowhead plant, this is, lots of critters like to eat this, from fish to deer to everything in between. This is real important, spread to other parts of the lake. On the right, there's Stephen hunkering down doing, I don't know what he's doing at the boat ramp. But in the foreground, there's a bunch of water willow, but within there are this, that Sagittaria plant that's really, that a lot of things like to eat. And the picture to the left is a close-up of that. Thanks to the water willow, it's harder for the turtles and the ducks and those sort of things and the deers to find these in the water willow. And so there's a group population growing at the boat ramp. That's 500 to 600 feet from the founder colony. So we're not seeing spread in other coves, but we're seeing spread within that cove. That's really great in 3 years. The water willow spread, this kind of shows the progression at one site on how, with the stable pool elevation, this stuff just has gone out in deeper, deeper water. We're hopeful that maybe it'll continue to spread with the dropping pool. Project measures. What does EPA think about this? This week, our draft report made it out from the in-state review to Region 6 EPA for their review. The output was successful. We've got good, diverse founder colonies established in Atoka Lake at those 5 sites. The outcome of having the spreading and all the benefits that we talked about is indeterminate. The goal was to see 50% growth outside of protected areas. We saw 27%. So we were shy of that, but we did see growth where it wasn't protected, and we also had seedlings growing in other areas. So we feel like with continued maintenance that there's a good chance of having that long-term outcome actually occurring. And also the tree plantings were just a neat enhancement for the project. What's our future prognosis? Continued maintenance, we see spread and growth of our target species throughout the lake. We've got well-established founder colonies now. Those water willow do a great job of kind of masking our target species, hiding them from the critters that really like them. And I also think the summer pool drawdown is going to increase the spread. Again, remember that slide I showed you where you saw the mud and the water? As Atoka Lake comes down, there'll be new areas of mud exposed where these plants can grow as the water level draws down. So it affords some protection for the herbivores. And finally, I got a slide, a Lake Stanley Draper, and that's what makes me really optimistic about Atoka. And finally, if we can get increased plant coverage on the shore margin, it's a good thing, the bad thing, it's going to increase your sediment retention in shallows. So it'll be some increase in your sedimentation rate, but it also is removing it out of the water column. This is Lake Stanley Draper this fall, and in the left-hand corner, there's kind of a white pole that's circled. That's the founder colony way up in the upper corner, and that was about, I don't know, 2.5, 3 foot water depth there. And as that lake dropped down, that's a colony of soft-stem bulrush, which is one of the plants we have growing in Atoka. You go, there's an oval to the right of it. That colony was established about a year later. And then you go further to the right of that, and that whole dark band is along kind of the creek channel there, and that's all more soft-stem bulrush growing. And then when you get a little closer on the bottom right side of that, there's that circle. That's a little cluster of soft-stem bulrush that's been there for, it's probably in its 2nd year. And now we're down around 8 foot water depth from normal pool elevation. And between that circle and that far left oval are little patches of that soft-stem bulrush all throughout that green area. So basically it's spread all over. So I would say as the water level starts to creep up on this lake, wherever it is, it's going to make a nice place for that bulrush to spread. I don't see why this sort of thing can't happen at Atoka. I think that's it. There's some funky aquatic plant hugger holding up a water willow plant. What's the vision for Atoka Lake? It's not to be like Lake Murray, but I think, hello, there it is. Here's Meeker Lake in 2004, and what we have is we have a nice transition from terrestrial. You can see some of the wildflowers on the bottom right corner, and you can see the bands, the different hues of green as you get to the water line. Those are all aquatic plants growing. So maybe something like that is what we'd like to see.
Question, is there any chance that the aquatic plants could produce in such an extent that they have a negative impact on the recreation or fishing activities in the lake?
Yeah, there is. I think it's more in your plant selection. But for example, at Atoka, having that water willow all over, that's where I pitch my lure at sundown to pull the bass, to catch the bass. It is, some people don't like aquatic plants in the shallows because it'll get wrapped around their legs and that sort of thing. And so I don't know what to say about that, except we just haven't seen very many people in Atoka Lake.
Thank you.
One thing I'd like to do is I wonder if the results we've seen so far may not be somewhat skewed by the fact that we've had unusual conditions at both lakes. At Atoka, it stayed full, and it never stays full. We always use the water. And at Draper, it stayed empty, and it never stays empty because we usually fill it. I would like to know when you thought you might be able to come back and give us an analysis of what happens once Atoka is drawn down some and Draper is filled. I mean, it may, obviously you probably couldn't do that the minute it happens, but I mean, perhaps next spring or maybe late in the fall, you have some idea, because we anticipate that Draper will fill sometimes in the late fall. Is that right?
2012. Of 2012. We'll be filling for every year.
Okay.
It'll be full in the fall of 2012.
I've got to start taking better care of myself. I want to make sure I'm here when that happens. Okay. Well, as soon as you can do some kind of an analysis of what and if you don't believe there's any impact to that, it just seems, I'm kind of a plant guy myself, and it just seems like it's not logical that could not have had some impact on either how well it worked at Atoka or how well I just think it's going to have an impact.
Well, it has. The stable water levels is good for the water willow.
Right.
And you'll notice in Draper, we don't have the water willow so much. Right. I thought it would flourish in there, but
right.
But the other plants are doing well.
Right.
And so, I was thinking the exact opposite. And so, but I think if what we're seeing at Draper is what we anticipated at Atoka, and we still saw success with the same strategy that we did at Atoka, where it stayed up and with the dropping. So, but that is in the plan, and because of these two projects and the relative success, I think in a couple of years we're going to apply for some more wetlands funds to be sciencey about looking at that.
I'd be interested in seeing what happens with regard to that.
Yeah, no, we will keep you updated.
Do we have a motion on this? Thank you. We have a motion. Have a motion and a second to approve item 8G. Questions? Hearing none, voting please. 8G is approved. Next item is item H. We do need executive session.
Yes, please.
We have a motion. We have to have a motion to go into executive session. Do we?
Yeah, but you could just do roll call.
Okay, all right.
Move to executive session.
I have a motion and a second. We'll have a roll call. We'll do it on the board. Okay. All right. We're in executive session. Well, why don't we do, before we go into executive session, let's finish the agenda, so if there's anybody here waiting on something, they don't have to wait. Is there any new business? Are there comments from staff, trustees, or citizens?
Mr. Chairman, I just have a couple of updates. Councilman Ryan asked earlier, and I did not fully answer the question about how much might Lake Hefner drop. In the last 3 weeks, it's been dropping about 4 inches a week. that will increase over time. So you may be at as much as a half a foot a week, it looks like, based on what we've seen in the last few weeks. And we have 6 weeks to go until we can get water from Lake Canton. So we're looking at 3 feet to 4 feet as a total drop from today's total is 1191.7. So we're definitely impacting recreation at the lake. The great news, though, is there's a 50% chance of rain, it looks like, in our forecast here in the next few days. So, again, we're hoping for rain, but we're working on a release from Canton if that doesn't work out.